This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. For this episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, we're in Chicago, Illinois. And in fact, this episode is going to air on the very first day of the Festival of Barrel-Aged Beers. The reason why I am here in Chicago. It's a quick turnaround on this episode, but joining me, I actually hoofed it out on the train today to Geneva, Illinois. And we're sitting here in the Geneva Lagerworks side of Art History Brewing in Geneva, Illinois. And joining me are Tom Rao and Greg Brown from Art History. Welcome to the podcast, Tom and Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is a fun one to do. I met Tom, was it 2017 or 2018 at the Brewery Accelerator event here in Chicago?
It was 18.
18, okay. But we met right here in Chicago at the Brewery Accelerator event that we did downtown that year. And, as we normally do in the Brewery Accelerator, we do lightning pitches that, first night of the Accelerator. Tom and his art history pitch won the lightning pitches that night and won a full page. They won some other stuff, a full page ad in Craft Beer and Brewing, yeast pitch and whatnot. And, and so we have been paying attention to what was going on with art history. You guys opened up in 2020. Have expanded. And then the craziest stuff started happening. Like our writers, like Kay Bernat, pitched me on a story about art history. And it's fun to watch and see these things come back, things that I have not planted out there with folks, but that are stories that our writers have brought, because you all have made some waves out here in the Chicago brewing world. Of course, Greg's got a long history here in the Chicagoland brewing. And this nice little web because, some other brewers that have trained under Greg, like Lane from Roaring Table, are also making their own waves here in Chicago. And so the connections are deep. There's lots of great lager brewing. And the coolest part of it is that Art History has been growing over the last several years by innovating by making traditional beers, innovating by making lagers, innovating by making working out deals with Binny's to sell things like ESB and brown ale in a special series through this. And it is the coolest thing to think about innovation, is going back to a lot of these traditional beer styles that need to be promoted, need to be loved. And there is an audience for if you just connect them with folks. We're going to talk about lager brewing through this. We're going to talk about making some of those traditional style beers, and we're going to talk about the art history approach to making those beers. But first, G&D Chillers, the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, are proud of the cool partnerships they've built over the past 30 years. G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. Want to maximize efficiency in your chiller? G&D's microchannel condensers are designed for less power draw. Their lighter weight and more compact design uses up to 70% less refrigerant, which means a lower GWP and lower operating costs. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call to discuss your next project. Also, this episode is sponsored by BSG and their partners HVG, who bring you the very best in German hops, including Amira, the latest from their hop breeding program. With its classic hoppy, slightly herbal, and zesty lemon aromas, it's the ideal hop for those looking to capture the traditional flavor of a classic German lager. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com to learn more. And is your brewery making its own ciders, seltzers, and other beverages beyond beer? If you need a central source for fruit flavor, Old Orchard has you covered. Old Orchard supplies flavored craft juice concentrate blends to beverage brands for the production of beer, cider, seltzer, wine, spirits, kombucha, and more. Flavor your lineup and streamline your sourcing by heading to oldorchard.com/brewer. Well, I want to dive into everybody's brewing history because you all have separate histories as well as a mutual history. But Tom, why don't we start, talking about your own beer history and, what drove you and Cindy to launch Art History Brewing?
Well, I think we have to look back to the late 80s when growing up in Canada, we had access to a lot of English-style beers, but there were a lot of controls in home brewing. And what happened was they relaxed the rules, and we got a chance to do a little bit more home brewing. And I was always excited about styles of beers that I would get from Europe. We Tried a little bit of home brewing, but I could never make never make a good beer that I could actually buy from from a store or get poured on a tap at a local pub. So over time, I gave up the home brewing and just started drinking beers from around the world. Was always a big fan, but the home brewing thing kind of went in the background until probably about 2014. A buddy of mine had a nice home brewing system and got back into it and realized that there's a lot of progress had been made in terms of what you could do on a home brew system. Got back into it myself with a homebrew system, and around the same time found myself at the short end of a corporate downsizing. So I had to figure out what I wanted to do, and then I think the bug was there, and decided to think about getting a formal education in brewing at the time, thinking maybe I'd like to brew, but some smart people had advised me that if you're going to get into brewing at this stage, find yourself the best brewer you can, run the business, and set up something that was going to be successful with a really good commercial brewing program. So Cindy and I decided that we would get into this business from a business ownership perspective. But I did attend the Doman's Siebel Institute, the international brewing program, and was able to spend some time in Europe, and then rekindled that taste for traditional European lagers, and that really drove the decision of how we want to set up this brewery. And so the search was on about how could we find the best brewer who could actually make that happen. And then I'll pass that on to my colleague here.
That led him to you, Greg.
Wow, that's got to live up to that. So I moved over here in 92 from Australia, and I didn't like your beer. Sorry. So I figured I could do better myself at home. So I started home brewing.
There's a Monty Python line about that, right?
Yeah, probably. So I started home brewing and learning about beer, and I had a friend who told me that the Map Room was looking for someone to teach a beer school. So I went down and I did that. I did that for just over 20 years. It was at the Map Room that I met Nick Floyd, and he told me he was leaving to open a brewery. You might have heard of it. It's called Three Floyds. And so I went to work for Nick at the Wine Cellar Brewery, and he left to open his brewery. Spent a little bit of time at the Wine Cellar. Then I went to Siebel, 96, got out of Siebel, started working at Goose Island, Fulton Street, production brewery. Worked with a couple of people there you might have heard of, Jim Seaback and Mac Brundleson.
Yeah, those guys.
Yeah, I've always been surrounded by greatness. So I worked at Fulton Street for...
Seaback, for those who are... brewmaster for Revolution, and of course Brindleton and Firestone Walker. Just so everyone's clear.
Yep. So left Fulton Street to work at a brew pub in Wrigleyville. That was a little ahead of its time, so it only lasted about 9 months. Worked at a variety of brew pubs, pretty much exclusively brew pubs since around 2000. So yeah, I'm back at a packaging brewery after 25 years, and I got to relearn it all again. So, but yeah, I hooked up with Tom and Cindy. They were opening a tap room, and I thought that was, I was happy. It's a tap room. I get to do whatever styles I want. And then COVID hit, and we got to sell this beer to somebody. So had to transition into packaging, and luckily that took off. We were the liquor stores, bennies, bars, and restaurants liked the beer. So yeah, that got us through. And Tom and I were kind of on the same page. You want to do the classic styles, especially lagers. So that's what we were doing at the tap room. And kind of seems like lagers maybe having a little bit of a thing, especially here in Chicago. So they decided to go full steam here and open up a Geneva Lager Works, a packaging brewery.
And so you went from a 10-barrel pub system to now, is this a 20-barrel kind of multi-vessel
Yep.
Production system here at Geneva Lager Works?
Yep. Went from your classic 2-vessel, 10-barrel, brew pub tap room system, where I was doing my best to make good, authentic lager, kind of half-assing it mostly. So when we decided to do this, I'm like, we have to do it the right way. We have to do like a German-style system with 4 vessels, horizontal lagering tanks. I didn't do decoction, but I have a steam-heated mash mixer. I can do as many temperature rests as my heart desires. So yeah, I wanted to do it right. I knew that would make a difference with the lager.
Sure. Well, we will talk about some of those difference makers. You've had some, some very particulars in the way that you've set up that brew house in order to brew exactly the way that you want to do it. But Tom, talk to me about, the focus of art history in terms of styles. I remember that lightning pitch a little bit, and you were talking about even then focusing on some of these classic styles, which really felt in 2018 like it was counter trend. And I think that might have been one of those things that everybody kind of like, even if we wanted to say, is that really going to work? There was also something about it that felt like maybe it was time, that maybe there is some space for this. And of course, now, we're absolutely seeing that there is this lager renaissance between, Dovetail and Goldfinger. There's a whole bunch of fantastic, and then, not only that, Phase 3, Roaring Table, a lot of folks are making great lagers these days. And I'm sure I'm leaving people out, and I apologize for that. But nonetheless, the competition is also really, really tight, and so you have to make great lagers in order to be able to be noticed for making that. Talk to me about coming up with this, because that's not all you make. You also make some IPAs. You also do feed the tap room with some, even some hazy IPAs, West Coast IPAs. Traditional beer might be the primary love, and there are multiple. You'll have a different German-style Pilsner, different Czech-style Pilsner on at the same time. Helles, dark lagers, all of like this big spectrum of lager on any given time. Talk to me about developing that beer plan for art history and what you wanted to be known for, and how you all went around making that work.
I think it started when took a trip out to the East Coast, and we're on that that classic journey to visit Alchemist and Treehouse and Trillium, and and go and take a look at some of the best of the hazy and the best of the Northeast style that was really, really hot in like 2017, 2018, and the original thought was, I'd really would like to brew something like that. Then we ended up at Jack's Abbey, and we started drinking some of their lagers. And what really struck us was they would take a base lager and they would do a single hop, version of it. And I remember tasting a Sabro hop for the first time in their base lager and saying, there's something really unique that you can lagers don't have to be one dimension. You can take a really nice solid malt base and treat it with a different hop, a different ABV, and that lightning pitch that I put together was really about the lagering tanks and doing different sort of single hop and different versions of lagers. I think that was the original thought process, and that was before going to Europe and then saying, well, there's something also really special about noble hops and the traditional styles and the classic hop varietals. So coming back here, there was a period of time where we said, well, we don't want to give up on the IPA. We don't want to give up on what people are drinking, because as a business you have to attract as many customers as possible. But there was a space. There was a space for lagers. There was a space for doing something special. And so through a common acquaintance, I got introduced to Greg, and we had a phone call, a couple of emails, and it really was what sort of classic styles do you like? And his was like I really like a Northern German Pils. I said, that's kind of my second favorite style. I really like a Czech, pale lager. He goes, that's my second favorite style. And from that point on, I think we kind of knew that, hey, if we could do this, then and get the basics done and do it well, then I think we can expand and try other things. And we weren't thinking about West Coast cold IPAs at the time or anything like that, but it was really about trying to at least get the basics done. And so I think Greg and I did like 13 batches of beer in my garage in 2019, and it was on a 5-gallon Blickman system. And I had all this stuff. I had the hop rocket. I had all this pumps and all this stuff. And he looked at it. He said, get rid of all that. Just give me 3 vessels. Give me some temperature control, and we'll make the beer. And we got rid of everything except the real basics. And he showed me process was the key. And it really didn't matter. The system is important to a certain degree, but the process was the key. So his last batch of Gravitas on the 5-gallon Blickman system, we actually put a sixtel of that as we were opening the tap room, and it was Gravitas. And you could not tell the difference between that Gravitas and what he was brewing on the 10-barrel, commercial system that we had. And that kind of said, okay, that spoke to me in terms of, all right, we got this. I think we can do this. The first few beers we put out were a pale ale and a West Coast IPA, which is because they were the quickest to brew. But behind those came a Czech pale lager and a Northern German Pilsner, which is what we really wanted to go live with, and that really was I think the defining moment. It's okay, we know what we want to do, and how do we do that on this on this cobbled together 10-barrel pub system with horizontal serving tanks behind the bar.
Not necessarily designed to brew lagers on this small pub system, but hey, you all make it work just like brewers everywhere do. You use the equipment you have to make the beers that you want, and you find the ways around the limitations of the equipment. It's a story as old as time. Well, I want to talk, about that process of lager brewing and how you all focus on that from ingredients, creative inspiration through that kind of technical process in the brew house that helps make you capture this character in your lagers. Before we do that, Pro Brew is excited to announce that they are currently featuring short lead times between 2 and 4 weeks for their in-stock Pro-Fill rotary can fillers. These can fillers run at speeds between 100 and 600 plus cans per minute while achieving precise and consistent filling volumes not achievable by most inline and mobile fillers. For more information, fill out their contact form at www.probrew.com or email contactus@probrew.com to learn exactly how they can take your operations to the next level. ProBrew, brew your beer. They've got those fillers just north of here in Milwaukee. It's not very far. Waukesha. It's not very far away, guys. Oh, and you like wildly aromatic IPAs and tropical lagers? Good thing Omega designed thiolized yeast for just that reason. Thiolized yeast are a new tool for brewers to bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. And wait, there's more. Omega yeast makes yeast to order with a consistent 1-week lead time, ensuring peak freshness and reliability. Also, we all have busy lives these days and can't afford to waste a day stuck on the couch because of a few drinks the night before. Z-Biotics is the answer we've all been looking for. Z-Biotics is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Give Z-Biotics a try for yourself. Go to zbiotics.com/beerandbrewing. That's all caps, beer and brewing, to get 15% off your first order when you use code Beer and Brewing at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. All right, let's talk about your approach, the art history approach. Now, you both agreed that German Pilsner and Czech Pale Lager were going to be some kind of core beers for art history. Where'd you go for the inspiration? Where did you then start? How'd you start building recipes from there, Greg?
Well, I guess I just went back to the classic styles of those beers, and before I started at art history, I had a little bit of downtime. I went to the Czech Republic. It was kind of the last destination on my bucket list. Tried the Urquell there, fresh. So when I got back, that flavor was fresh in my mouth.
The diacetyl.
Well,
no, I'm just kidding.
Actually, at the brewery,
you learn to love it.
Yeah,
you really do.
At the brewery, I didn't get any diacetyl. So,
okay.
Prague, that was a different story.
That's true. The Urquell in the at the brewery tour
Right.
that's open fermented in the basement.
Oh,
Even though they'll tell you that it's just like it is its own beer.
that was one of the happiest moments of my life, was
Yeah.
getting that beer out of that tank. So when we were doing our pilot brewing, I think one day we were brewing our hazy IPA, which uses a lot of Golden Promise. And I tasted the wood. I'm like, that really tastes kind of like an Urquell sort of malt profile. So when I was doing the Czech pale lager recipe, the Gravitas, I thought about adding a little bit of Golden Promise in there just to accentuate that malt character, because we don't do decoction here on this brewery. So I needed that malt. So we add, I think it's about 20% Golden Promise, and the rest is Bohemian Pils malt. And we use a hop from Michigan. We use the Zupa Saz. We don't use the Czech Saz. It has a little more fruit character to it, but it's a much higher alpha, so you don't have to use as much. And to me, I wanted to use the Urquell yeast, the authentic yeast, the notorious diacetyl producer. So I get that. I think that's key. I think that yeast, the only way I can describe it is that, to me, it has a little bit of a shortbread sort of character to it. It's just a very distinctive flavor that you get from that Urquell yeast. And then as far as the North German Pils goes, my favorite beer probably on the planet is Bitburger. So I basically wanted to make a Bitburger. So I use a very light colored malt. Use Tetning. Whatever hops I use, I guess.
You say light colored malt. What do you mean?
It's Best Heidelberg, and that's about a 0.8 to a 1.2 color.
Right. Really light Pilsner.
Yeah. The hops, I think it's a secret, whatever Bitburg uses, but I use mostly Tetning, a little bit of Pearl, and I'm looking for that nice dry North German Pils flavor with that bitterness, but not too much sweetness. Those are probably my two favorite beers. So that's kind of where I came from to get those recipes.
Let's go. I want to come back. Let's start with the Czech Pilsner, because I want to dig down on this a little bit. I think it's interesting that you might blend two-row in with Pilsner malt to build this kind of idea of body in lieu of some of the decoction that otherwise might capture that. I mean, when Joe and I were in the Czech Republic earlier this year, everybody heard it on the podcast. Brewers describe their beers as sweet.
Yeah.
Like, you won't find a single American brewer who's going to call their Pilsner a sweet. But every single Czech brewer will use the word sweet to describe their beer, that it has the sweetness to it. And that sweetness is the key to drinkability, the pitelnost.
Exactly.
Because these beers have heavy hop loads, they also have to have this malt character that they call sweet. We're in full pastry mode here in the United States, and so sweet has a whole different connotation in beer here. But for that, so talk to me. I think that's an interesting way to go about solving that problem in lieu of decoction. How did you develop the ratio for this, and how have you tweaked that over time? And how do you really think about what exactly that that malt character, that Golden Promise, does?
Well, one thing I discovered, I'd always wondered, how does Urquell get that color just using Pilsner malt? And it's always when I get a Czech Pilsner somewhere at a brewery, and if it's not that color, I'm like, that's not a Czech Pils. That's like a German Pils. You have to have that color, I think, to call it a Czech Pils. But when I was doing the tour of Urquell, on the wall they had this schematic, like the generic schematic every brewery kind of has. And, they told us earlier on the tour that it's all steam. Well, I was looking at the schematic, and underneath the decoction cooker, there's a little picture of a little flame. I'm like, could that be real? Could they actually use fire, just this on this one vessel?
Just for the decoction
Just for the decoction. And I heard a lecture from the Urquell brewmaster, and I might be wrong. I think it's correct. I think that's how they do it. They have this vessel with a direct fire with a chain spinning around at the bottom to prevent scorching. And that's how they develop that color and also that sort of slight melanoidin flavor. And so the way I get that is to use this Golden Promise, just a little bit of this Golden Promise, which just sort of amplifies the malt character a little bit.
Does it give you enough of that melanoidin, kind of note then? It wouldn't seem, just, from the surface that, it might be the same kind of, character.
Probably not. Probably not.
I'm not trying to call you out on it. I'm just curious to
Unless Tom and Cindy want to buy me a direct fire cooker with a chain spinning around at the bottom.
Sure.
But yeah, I think it's enough.
It needs a direct fire system now, sure.
But there is that flavor in Urquell.
Right.
And you're right, it is under attenuated. That's part of the character of that. They want it under attenuated. But you've got to have that flavor.
Well, I think that decoction also just locks in some unfermentable, just through that process. And so, maybe, I don't know if I call it under attenuated as much as there is just something that won't ever be able to attenuate. And it's that weird thing where it strikes you at first as a little bit sweet when you start drinking it. And then it creates that magical dryness as it finishes. Because the beer's dry.
Exactly.
It just dries, it changes over time. And so it feels like as you start taking a sip that, oh, this is delicious, and indulgent. And then by the time you finish, you're like, oh, I need to take another sip. Right?
It's a masterpiece. And one of the great things about being here in Geneva, Illinois, and I was very happy to hear this when I came on board, is the crazy thing is the whole water supply of Geneva, Illinois is RO water. And they just allow enough to bleed back in to give it the barest amount of mineral content. So we have super soft water here. So, I'm responsible for some of the quality of the beer. I think the water is responsible for a lot of it. It's just the perfect base to make that style of beer. I mean, I really don't do anything to it. I just add a little bit of acid for the pH, but the water is just unbelievable here. And you go, one town either side of us, and the water's horrible.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're very lucky in that respect.
Sure. Let's keep talking about that Czech lager. You also want to, keep some body in the beer. Is there anything particular to your mash? You're obviously going through a step mash process here. You've also built here at Geneva Lager Works, you've built a lauter ton with some dimensions that'll specifically allow you to mash and lauter in the way that you want to do it to be gentle on these beers. Talk to me about that.
So I do, I'm sure I'm pronouncing it completely wrong, but I do a hochkurz, which means short and hot, which is something I hadn't heard of up until 5 years ago. And I was doing some reading, and I started, learning about this, which is sort of the German cheat for decoction. It's a two-step mash. You do it's about a 64 C up to about a 70 C. So what would it be? About a 147 up to about a 158. So you do those two steps, and you sort of maximize your your beta rest and your alpha amylase rest. So I do that, and I was doing it at the taproom brewery, but I was doing it just by pumping in hot water from the hot liquor tank and kind of guesstimating it. Here I just push a button and the mash mixer does it automatically. But yeah, I want to hit all those numbers and get as much fermentation.
And it's a fast move then between the two temperatures?
Yeah, it's 30 minutes at one, about a 20-minute raise, and then a 30-minute at the next one.
And what is the, conceptually, what is that, that mash regimen, what is the intention, what does it do to duplicate or replicate the idea of a decoction?
I think just going through those temperatures. So with the classic decoction, I'm no expert, but you start kind of low, and then you use the decoction to go slowly through all the temperature steps. This kind of replicates that in some way. As you go through, you hit all those temperature points.
Cool. But then you also within your lauter ton, you've built an oversized lauter ton, not for the reason that a lot of brewers today are doing it to make giant double IPAs, triple IPAs, or imperial stouts, with gigantic mash bills, but so that you can maintain a grain bed that's rather low. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So at the taproom brewery, we had the classic 2-vessel system. It was undersized for a 10-barrel system. So the grain bed and the combi mash lauter was probably like 2 feet deep for just a regular 12 Plato beer, which, you read any good brewing text, that's completely, wrong. So over here, we have the nice oversized lauter ton. It's a 20-barrel brewery. The lauter ton's probably, for a 25-barrel brewery. So the grain bed depth on a 12 Plato beer is probably never more than a foot deep. And just the efficiency from the taproom brewery moving over here jumped up like 10%.
Yikes. Are there any other, in addition to efficiency, are there any, flavor benefits in terms of, like tannic malt extraction or, distracting flavors that more gentle mash approach produces?
The quicker you can get the wort through the grain bed, that probably cuts down on the amount of tannins you're pulling through, and you're obviously extracting more wort from the lauter ton. We don't have to run the rakes at all; it pretty much just works its way through. So,
yeah. So we've talked a little bit about the Czech pale lager. Let's talk a little bit about the Northern German Pils a little bit more. Similar mash regimen on that. That one, I imagine, is all Pilsner malts, just because it has to be so light and so focused. Right.
So the North German Pils, that's pretty much all German Pils malt. Nice light colored malt. Same Hochkurz regimen as the Czech lager. I just want a nice dry character to that beer.
Mm-hmm.
We hop it with Tettnang and Pearl. And I'm just looking for that nice clean bitterness with that beer. Just, super cleanly, a little bit of malt sweetness, but I just love those nice dry North German Pils.
Sure. So what was it about that, best?
Best Heidelberg.
Best Heidelberg, okay.
It's a nice light color, and it also has like a little bit of a sweetness to it. Yeah, I don't.
Both of those things together, it sounds unusual.
Yeah, it does, but somehow it delivers.
Huh.
But yeah, I just love those beers. Those really drinkable North German Pils. My first brewery stop when I ever went to Germany was at Bitburg. So
sure. So what's you mentioned you're using Tettnang hops. What's the goal in this in terms of, bitterness, but also hop flavor? Is there a way that you might describe the hop flavor that you're going for here? I mean, we can talk about it in generic noble hop terms, but they definitely are different lanes that these hops fall into. What's your goal for yours?
So I use a little bit of Pearl. That kind of rounds the flavor out a little bit, and the Tettnang just brings this spicy character to it, just this beautiful, clean, spicy character, which is what I really like about those styles of beer. It just comes in quickly, delivers the bitterness, and then it's gone. It's not lingering. The Tettnang is just a beautiful hop.
Why blend the Pearl in there too?
I just think that rounds it out a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think probably those breweries up there probably use more than just 2 hops. But I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. just use those 2 and dial that in.
Sure. Is there anything else to the German Pilsner that you think is a real difference maker in your process?
Well, the big thing is the lagering, which we couldn't really do. We had horizontal lagering tanks at the tap room, but we were using them as serving tanks. So over here we have the horizontal lagering tanks, and I was making the same beer over there as I'm making here, and the beers are definitely better just from the lagering time. You can really taste the difference.
Yeah. when you say that, what is it? What was the difference?
To me, I kind of compare it to like, the old stereos had the graphic equalizer and it kind of cuts out the highs and the lows. To me, that's what lagering does. It cuts out like just the highs and the lows and everything's just right down the middle. And you just get a beautiful, clean flavor to it. Just rounds everything out. I was kind of a skeptic, but we put them in anyway. And when I tasted the first beers out of here, I'm like, those Germans are right. This is why they've been doing it for 500 years. They were onto something here. So yeah, it's a thing.
In audio terms, it's like it's a compressor, right?
Oh, okay.
You would you compress the highs and the lows, but by by narrowing down the band of that audio frequency into the middle, you can boost the impact. You can boost the volume out of that, and so, but the compressor is actually the secret to radio voice.
Oh, there you go.
It's that thing that makes the radio voice so rich. It's a trick that we use when producing this very podcast. So maybe you could say that we lager every episode of this podcast before it comes out. Maybe we shouldn't say that. Let's talk about some of the other lagers you do. Also, some of the smoked lagers you do, because in fact, your highest scoring beer with Craft Beer Brewing was the Fasten beer, which scored a 98 with the blind judges of Craft Beer Brewing. So let's maybe switch gears, talk a little bit about that. But before we do that, who doesn't love free samples? The Perfect Puree is offering a free sample box of their frozen fruit purees, concentrates, and blends to professional brewers. Picked at the peak of ripeness, their fruit is pureed and frozen for optimal fresh flavor and color. Explore classics from red raspberry and blood orange to unique fruit juice blends such as Yuzu Lux Sour. Choose from 40 plus flavors and build a free sample box at perfectpuree.com/beer. That's perfectpuree, PUREE.com/beer. Complimentary to professionals only. Also, this episode is brought to you by Yakima Chief Hops. The 7th annual Pink Boots blend is now available for pre-order. $3 of every pound of the Pink Boots blend purchased will be donated to the Pink Boots Society, a nonprofit organization that supports women and non-binary individuals in the fermented and alcoholic beverage industry through education. Place your orders from Yakima Chief Hops and secure your volume of this limited blend for your Pink Boots collaboration brew day on March 8th, International Women's Day. Learn more at www.yakimachief.com/pink-boots-blend. Let's talk about some of the other lager styles that you brew. The beer that's in our glasses now actually is a beer there's a recipe for this beer in Craft Beer and Brewing magazine. It's a Veritas. It's a Czech dark lager. That recipe appeared alongside the Breakout Brewer story a few years ago that Kate Bernat wrote on you. She was inspired to write that story because you all, I think she had your beer at Hop Leaf, and this is actually the House Dark beer at Hop Leaf. And she pitched us on writing a story about you. It's like, oh yeah, I know art history. So she wrote the story. You all contribute to this. And if you are a subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing, you can go on our digital archives on the website and on the app and dig up this recipe or search for it on the website and make your own version of it if you choose to. But let's talk about this one, Greg. Talk about brewing dark lager in the Czech vein. Again, where was your inspiration? And how did you set about making this beer in a way that, because while it's dark and there is just a little bit of roast character, which is definitely in line with some of the, Czech dark lager that we've had in the Czechia, you have to be very careful about brewing this in a way to kind of maintain the balance that's expected out of it. Talk to me about designing this Czech dark lager.
So when I was in Prague, one of my goals was to go to a brew pub I'd been reading about for 20 years in the Michael Jackson books, which was Ufleku. Yeah, supposedly the oldest brew pub in the world. So I was so excited to go to this place. So I went to Ufleku and I drank the beer and I'm like, it has almost sort of like a porter quality to it. It's it's not like just getting a Czech pale lager and adding some dark malt to it. It's really a beer unto itself.
And a fair amount of sweetness in the beer too.
Yeah. So I came back. I'm like, I want to make that. I want to make the Ufleku version of this beer. And I have a book that was written by Thomas Wyman and Horst Dornbusch. It's called Brewing Dark Lager, and guess what? It's about brewing dark lager. And there's a recipe for Ufleku beer in there. So I basically use that to start with. I'd say the only real difference, I use floor malted Bohemian dark malt. I use the Supersaz hops from Michigan because the hops really are not that huge of a deal with this beer. But I did want to use the floor malted Bohemian, and I guess that comes from a very traditional malt house brewery in the Czech Republic. So yeah, it's pretty much all Czech and beautiful Geneva water. And I've heard some people say, oh, it's there's two schools of thought, I guess, with this style. It's like either the kind of the Czech dark, which is just sort of a very light version, I guess, and then there's sort of this heavier bodied version. I kind of prefer this, but I think some people are like, well, that's not really a Czech dark because it tastes too roasty. But there is a background to it. So
when we were drinking dark lager in the Czech Republic, we had some that were even smoky. That the range, again, there is always a range, just as there is in any style anywhere. Saying that anything is one thing will be quickly disproven by traveling to and visiting a number of breweries, that are all making these things. There are as many different expressions as there are breweries that make Czech dark lager. And like I said, some actually have a little bit of smoke character to them. This is maybe not as sweet as the Ufleku version. I thought that Ufleku's version almost had like a vaguely saccharine sweet note on the very top of it. That is not there in this. This is definitely maybe a touch more robust in that sense, where it's supporting some of the sweetness with some of that flavor. But and then because you're not decocting, you're not having to go through some of the other questions, some of the other issues with making a dark beer using a decocted process, where you certainly don't want to cook all these dark malts. But you're also trying to leave a little bit of that sweetness to kind of support the heft in this beer. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I just I didn't really want a beer that was, if you closed your eyes, it would kind of just taste like a like a Czech pale lager. I wanted something that stood by itself and had all those notes to it. And like I said, to me, the Ufleku is very sort of porter-like. I mean, I don't know any of their fermentation temperatures or their process, but I really wanted to get close to that and do something that that would kind of pay tribute to that. Sure.
And in terms of sweetness, where does this beer finish?
This one's about 3.4.
Huh.
So yeah, it's up there. Yeah.
And the beer itself, it's a 12 degree.
That's a 12 degree. Yeah. Yep. We do the 12 degree Veritas, and at the holidays we do it's about a 14 Plato Czech dark. Wenceslas is the name of that one. We actually have that lagering right now. So that's sort of our supersized Czech dark.
Supersized, 14%, like 5.5% ABV. Right.
And it's a different flavor profile to this too. It doesn't have that
6.4. Okay. Well,
it doesn't have those roasty notes as much as this. If you taste them side by side, it's not like just a stronger version of this. It's a different beer.
And what's the intention of that one then?
That one, I guess, is just to just have that extra alcohol and maybe not be as roasty. Just be a little bit more of a warming beer.
And from a branding perspective, it's kind of a holiday lager. So it really the package type is really celebrating the Christmas spirit, the Saint Wenceslas and the the red and green, and it's actually one of our most popular beers, and We brewed the biggest batch of any beer we've ever brewed. This one, we actually had to split the batch. We did some of it in Lagerworks and some of it at Art History, just because the demand of that beer is actually very special for us in the holidays.
Fun. Let's talk about making smoked beer, because there were, as we were over at the tap room before we walked over here to the Lagerworks production brewery, four smoked beers on the tap list. It's a bold move.
So I think it starts with in the summertime we like to do a smoked Helles. We take the Good Morning Munich sort of kind of starting point, and correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but we're probably in that 12-13% of the malt bill is smoked malt, and that one is probably just using your Behrman smoked beechwood smoked.
Yep.
And then we kind of said, all right, let's keep a couple of those because we don't want to let Dovetail have all the fun. And they did kind of promote this October as Rauk Beer Month, and we're all in. And so last year we had two beers. We had the Rauk beer, which is our Goodnight Bamberg, which is about a 40% or a bigger beechwood smoked. It's a true Rauk beer. It's very similar to what you would get in Bamberg. But then we did a Smoketober, which was a smoked wheat malt.
Right. It's the oak smoked wheat from Wyoming, yeah.
Yeah, and that was sort of taking our fest beer and extending, because we'd always sell through our Oktoberfest beer, towards the end of September, and we just want to keep going. So we would release a secondary version of that fest beer as a smoked version and carry that through October. So now we have this oak smoked wheat malt fest beer. We have this beechwood smoked Helles that's coming, the last vestiges of the summer. We have the Rauk beer, and then just for good measure, we did a smoked porter. So that was cherry wood smoked porter, and that was done by Carolyn over at Art History. And we kind of add that to the mix, and we said, if we're going to do smoke, we're going to do smoke. And so all those beers are pouring, and they're actually, a very big percentage of what we've been pouring in a tap room.
Really?
All October.
Really?
Yeah.
Just because of October being smoked beer month.
That's right. Now we'd like.
Thank you, Dovetail, but you can't have all the fun yourselves.
You can't have all the fun, and we'd like to make it bigger, but I think there's a top limit to how much smoked beer you can do. So maybe 4 is might be the limit. But again, Fassenbier, which you earlier mentioned, could be our Lenten smoke. So we're going to try to do something every season. So there'll always be a smoked beer available.
That's fantastic. They had Fastenbier, Lent beer on at Schlenkerla when we were there in March this year, obviously because we were in the middle of Lent. And really just a beautiful, slightly larger version of the Merits, and
yes.
just slightly more alcohol, and but beautiful. Nonetheless, let's talk about your approach. Obviously, there are a variety of approaches. If you look at it in that traditional Bamberg way, those brewers making their own smoked malt, can make it the way they want to make it. So they're making 100% smoked malt beer. I was talking about this earlier today with another brewer. When we are looking at it from the Weyermann standpoint, Weyermann is designing smoked malt so that knowing that it is going to be a specialty malt that you are adding into your recipe as a specialty malt in addition to base malt. And so it has an intensity generally to it that is there in a way that is meant to be used in a different kind of way than some of these other malts in smoked beer. And that is going to define the way that you design a beer recipe about this. So, as you're thinking about designing smoked beer, like even a light smoked beer, like a smoked Helles, how do you start thinking about that, Greg? And how do you work smoked malt into that beer in order to keep that smoke and balanced in the right kind of way?
Well, when we first talked about doing a smoked beer, Tom was like, well, let's do like 100% because that's what Schlenkerla does. And I'm like, well, you can't use 100% because it'll be a pale beer. You have to, if you're going to make it the same color, it has, you're going to have to add some specialty malt. And you're right. The process is completely different from the way Schlenkerla or Spezial does it. it's part of their malting process.
They make they make 100% of their malt exactly the right color and their
Exactly.
exact spec
Right.
that they want it to be with the exact right amount of smoke
Right.
to make their beers. Yeah.
Right. So when you're doing it here, you have to take into account that, that this has been, processed in a different way. So I think the max I've ever done is about 60%.
Still a good
a good amount.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like that, but you have to sell the beer at the end of the day. So yeah, we kind of dialed that back. But
in smoked Helles, what does a grist bill look like for your smoked Helles?
smoked Helles, that's about 20%.
Yeah.
The Fasten
And
beer,
it's the 20% Beechwood.
Yeah.
Fireman Beechwood.
Yep. The Fasten beer was about 20% also, because the Fasten beer and the Helles, they're lighter beers. The Fasten is just I'm not claiming my beer is anything as close to Schlenkler, but it's a Madsen style beer. So yeah, we just kind of want the hint, that sort of background flavor.
Sure.
And with the Smoketoberfest that we did, it's only about 12%. So it almost, the only smoke sensation you really get is this sort of drying, oaky, sort of barrely flavor to it. But I love smoked beer. I mean, Bamberg might be my favorite German city. I've been there multiple times. I just love drinking that beer, and I think everybody here should know about it. And it's not for everybody, obviously, but
Bamberg is amazing.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
And that beer is just so great. And even the area, the whole Franconian area is just beautiful, and there's so many great beers there. So we just wanted to double down on it and promote it in our own small way. And
do you adjust any other parameters to the Helles? Do you adjust any the kind of finishing gravity, or try to leave a little bit of sweetness to balance out some of that smoke character? Are there any other parameters that change there other than the smoked malt?
No, it's pretty much our regular Helles. Our Helles is got a nice sweetness to it anyway, so it works pretty well. It's
embracing sweetness in Helles. Excellent.
Yeah. Helles. Helles is one of the hardest beers to make. It really is, because you've got to find that line between hop flavor and that sweetness, and also make it drinkable. And I tinkered with it for a while, and I thought I had it down. And we moved over here, and I was lagering, and I'm like, this is really good. And I'm like, I thought, well, you could use a little bit more mineral character because we have that soft water. So I added a little bit of gypsum, and it sent the bitterness way out of spec. And I'm like, this is way too bitter. So I had to dial that back in. So one little thing can really mess it up. So that's why I say it's a very difficult beer to get right.
One of the keys to Helles, though, is that malt character. And it's, again, I know we've harped on this on the podcast in the past, but the idea that Helles is not a minimalist beer. It's in the German sense. No one views it like, it's not a crispy boy in that sense. No. The way that American brewers have started to think about, Helles or Pilsner, really, they're not minimalist beers. The idea of Helles is that it's a celebration of malt. How do you, embrace that kind of malt character? And as you say, like some of that malt sweetness, because that's pretty much key to the style.
Well, I use the Bavarian malt. I don't do the decoction.
Bavarian Pilsner malt?
Bavarian Pils. I don't do the decoction.
Is there a specific brand? Is it Bayerman? Or?
It's what we use now is Malt Europe.
Okay.
Malt Europe Bavarian Pils. And I use a little bit of honey malt to kind of just a tiny amount, just to give it a little bit more of that melanoid.
Just a couple
sweetness.
of percent.
Yeah, just a little bit. I use Hallertau, all Hallertau. And lagering. I think lagering is the key to Helles. It just gives it that flavor. And it's crazy that there's five major breweries in Munich making Helles, and they're all a little bit different. Some have a little more hop character. I like Augustiner, but you have the Augustiner Edelstoff, but you also have Augustiner Vollbier, which is a little more hoppier, which is actually what I kind of prefer. But it's just nuts that it's in one city you have this one style of beer and there's a few different interpretations of it.
Sure. Did we talk about yeast in this on the German side? I know we talked about your using your quell yeast
Right.
on the Czech lager. How about your German style lagers?
Well, I was using, so it was kind of crazy. I was using 3 different lager strains at the tap room. I was using the Augustiner for the Helles. I was using dry 3470 for the Pilsner. I was using the Urquell yeast. And moving over here, I'm like, this is not sustainable. I can't use 3 lager yeast, So I dropped the Augustiner. I miss it. But so we just use the dry 3470 and the Urquell yeast over here. That way we can repitch. But yeah, maybe one day for a special beer, we'll get some Augustiner in.
Sure. Well, and you can use that 3470 to make IPA now too, because
apparently
anything is possible.
Apparently,
anything is possible.
World's upside down. I've been around long enough that I've seen some crazy stuff, but yeah, the last few years have been really crazy.
Sure. Well, quickly we're starting to get on in time here, but I do want to talk about some of the approach to other classic styles. You've got a cask pouring. You've got a cask engine in the tap room. You all have been expanding your cask ales and leaning into building these traditional English style beers. You've also been focusing just on some of these styles that maybe aren't as cool or hip as as some of the haziest and pastriest of things today. But in a weird way, it actually makes you a little bit more, I wouldn't say unique, but it gives you a focus that people are attracted to. Retailers, as you play this retail beer game, you're always trying to find some way to provide something to retailers and then to consumers that not everyone else is providing. And as certain things have fallen out of favor, it might create opportunity because there are still drinkers that love those kinds of beers and just don't get them in that way. And so Art History as a brand is focusing in on how to make excellent renditions of some of these more traditional styles. And you want people to associate that with the Art History brand. So let's talk about, some of the approach to English style traditional beers. Talk to me a little bit about that, Tom.
Okay, well, I'll start with we got our hands on a Engram engine through one of our local breweries that had them sit in the basement. And Greg said, I can do these. And so we converted one of our temperature-controlled kegerators to allow us to put the engine on it and put a cask breather and, basically start pouring, beers from a firkin, pulling those from the engine. And the first couple beers, I think, were interesting. We were just kind of playing around with it. But then we realized that people named Simon and Toby started showing up at the brewery and, ordering these beers. And like, okay, well, and they were actually saying these are pretty good. So we did a Yorkshire Best Bitter called Dithering Bitter. And, a gentleman from Yorkshire would just show up every time we put these on. And he'd sit there and he'd drink them. And next thing you know, we'd put an ESB on and then someone else would come out. And so we've developed this clientele at the tap room that would, be looking forward to the different styles. So we started acquiring firkins. We started building a firkin inventory, and we were doing all these at the tap room. And then as we moved to Lagerworks with the production side of things, things got a little serious. So now we're looking at 20-barrel batches, putting half of that into firkins. Canning most of it and only having a little bit of draft. So really, it's packaging and firkins, and we're seeing some of the customers in Chicago maybe dusting off some of the old engines that they've had sitting around that maybe they stopped using 10, 15, 20 years ago. And we've got a couple of accounts that are just have re-energized the whole marketing and positioning of these. And next thing you know, we get these firkins into circulation. And for the first time in our history, since we've opened the tap room 3.5 years ago, a cask beer was the number one selling pint or number one selling draft beer in the tap room, beating out Gravitas, which has been, basically our number one selling draft beer off the Lucre in the tap room since we opened. So Dithering Bitter, Yorkshire Best Bitter, basically became number one selling beer in the tap room. So we got a second anagram engine. We're looking at maybe expanding, having a couple of these on. And now we're looking at different beers that we brew that, we could pull a couple of firkins of this. And we have a couple customers that are saying, yeah, show us the variety. And we see a couple of our other breweries in the city starting to do this. Some, may have been associated with Greg in the past, and some maybe not. And we're really excited about, building this this pub ale series and having something available in a rotating fashion with some of our customers. And the tap room has really been, I think the driving force behind it. But I'll let Greg talk about how he does this, because it's just these are beers that they're very different from anything else we brew, but they are in on brand, or traditional. They're authentic, and people know that.
I'm here for the cask beer renaissance, Greg.
I never thought I'd live to see that one.
Every few years we run a little feature package on cask ale just to remind people it's still there. Yeah. We've got to bring it back, and I joke about this, but eventually we'll get it right, and eventually it'll be on the front end of a new trend, and we'll have been there. Even though we've been there recycling, not recycling, but revisiting the topic every few years, just because you got to plant those seeds.
When it's the cover story, I really believe it.
We've put cask ale on the cover in the past. I mean, we're a wonky beer magazine for brewers. We can get away with that, and some other people can't. But let's talk about how you set about designing proper cask ale.
Well, to be honest, I've been doing it. Every brewery I've worked at in the last 20 years, I've had real ale. There's been a hand pump, and mostly I've been banging my head against the wall, trying to explain it to people. But like Tom said, we've a lot of expats coming in and drinking it, and if you can please those guys, especially the Yorkshiremen, you're doing a good job. So it comes down to ingredients. Just English malt, English yeast. We use about 3 different English ale strains.
Oh yeah.
Depending on the region we're trying to the beer we're trying to make. Source our English hops direct from England.
So you're dialing in yeast to the region.
Yeah, it's yeast is a big part of the character of those beers.
How different are these 3 yeasts that you use?
Well, so that we use one from the Midlands. So that's we make a mild, like a dark mild, and that sort of has a little bit of a minerally quality to it. We use one that's from.
Is that a yeast that people can get?
Not that one.
Oh no,
no. I think it's me and Roaring Table, pretty much the only ones that have that.
How do you have a yeast, an exclusive Midlands lager or ale yeast?
I had a friend smuggle some back from a brewery here. Yorkshire.
Okay, that's a good story though.
Yeah. The Yorkshire one, Omega sells it, and that's the beers in Yorkshire, the Northern Pints. They sort of accent the malt a little bit more. So that's sort of more of a malt-driven flavor profile. And in the North, typically they'll use a sparkler on the engine, so that's what we do. And those are generally not as conditioned as much as the sort of more of your London style. So when we do a London style ale, would typically use like the Fuller's, the 1968 yeast. Mm-hmm. Again, that's a little drier, accents hop flavor a little bit more. And we don't use the sparkler, so we condition the firkins a little bit more for those.
What's the sparkler do in that scenario?
The sparkler, it almost nitrogenates the beer. So you're forcing the beer through those little holes in the sparkler, and just all the gas just breaks out and has that. It looks like a Guinness cascading.
Sure.
I think a big part of why it sells at the tap room is the engine is right there in front of the customers, and they see this beautiful show And they're like, well, what is that? And then, they see the bartender pulling on the engine. So it's all, it's actually, it's kind of a show, and they want to try it.
And those beers, because it breaks out so much of the carbonation through the pouring process, end up a little bit softer and a little bit sweeter. And,
Exactly.
those are attractive beers, especially if, in this current day and age where, bitey, heavy CO2 beers, can feel pretty aggressive to some folks.
Yeah, they're the kind of the anti-hazy IPA because they're clear. Well, they should be clear. And they're usually, around 4 or below % alcohol. And they're drinkable. I mean, the English, they sit in pubs, they want to have beer they can drink. I don't know how many pints of hazy IPA you could drink.
Depends on how it's made.
You personally, I don't know. But
I've had some good ones over the last couple of weeks.
It should be a drink. It should be a drinkable beer.
Right.
So yeah, it's I think we go through a firkin a week maybe, which is pretty good, and it keeps it fresh. So yeah,
are there any other secrets that you found to making really good cask ale?
It's a lot of work, especially when you're filling the casks and you're priming and you're adding the finings and you're dealing with the casks. It's probably a lot more work than a lot of people want to deal with. And then if you send it out, which we do, we only send it to accounts that we know what they're doing. This is probably why it's not that big a thing, is because a lot of times it's not good. It's not done properly. So yeah, it's a lot of extra work.
Sure,
it's a labor of love.
Yeah, the cleaning side is another whole side of things.
Yeah. Some of these firkins come back, and I don't know what they put in them. But
I don't know, what did you put in them? Yeah.
Well, I always say just because that bunghole is like 2 inches wide doesn't mean you can throw like fruit in there. That's not why it's like that.
Okay, so hopefully they're not adding their own adjuncts to your English ale firkins or whatnot.
Yeah.
Anyway, nonetheless, well, we've been talking for a while now. Let's zoom out a little bit. You all opened, Tom, in the midst of the pandemic in 2020. A couple years in, you find this success making traditional styles, making a lot of lager. You decide to expand. You open up Geneva Lager Works here, a production brewery in the same town as the Taproom Brewery, with this big focus on expanding on lagers. Now you all are in an aggressive growth push. You've got salespeople selling art history beer. You've got some key accounts at some really, truly world-class influential beer bars like Hop Leaf, Beer Temple, others here in Chicago. Amongst those that know beer, they're embracing your beer and also telling a great story about quality, for art history. What's next? What do you hope to achieve over the next 5 years? Where do you see art history going? Where do you hope this is when we continue to talk? And I come back to you 5 years from now. What will you have hoped to achieve by then?
I think one of the first things that we started thinking about was...
we are at 5 years since we first met.
Yes,
What's the next 5 years look like?
Yeah. Well, I won't be retired, that's for sure. So I think that what we're experiencing now is we went in a lot of different directions, especially with having two breweries. We have a 10-barrel system. We have a 20-barrel production system. So we've been able to kind of spread our wings a little bit. We've done things like fruited sours and West Coast, we've done cold IPA. I mean, we're trying a lot of different things. But in the end, I think what it's going to come down to is we're gonna find that there's probably a core. I don't want to use the term, looks like flagship, but I think there's got to be a return to the flagship styles, the flagship beers that people are going to stick with and buy and want to see all the time. So I think our move in the next 12 months, at least, maybe 18 months, is to move from trying to do everything and testing waters in a lot of different areas to finding out, hey, these are the beers that really work. These are the beers that our customers want from us, and they're willing to, come back and buy. And I think that, a little more focus on those beers. So I think that the production system that we're building here at Lagerworks is going to be focused on that and producing more of the beers that not only our customers want, but our sales reps that are now telling us, hey, if you had more of this, it was always available. This is always going to be something that our customers will always want to have in stock. So I think that's kind of the focus is we're moving away from a taproom focus. The taproom is great as people can come in, they can try different things. But we're in Geneva. We're an hour and plus outside of Chicago.
Yes, I know.
Yes.
I took the train out here
Yes.
from Chicago, from the Ogilvy Transit Center.
Yeah.
But right, it's not a place where you just end up.
Right. And we're
Some
in
great breweries right here in Geneva. There's Penrose right over here. Riverlands is over here too.
Yes, we've got Sturdy Shelter just opened up in Batavia. We are surrounded, I think, by 9 or 10 breweries from North Aurora to St. Charles to Elburn. And it's a competitive sort of taproom market. So, rather than try to be everything to everybody, I think the taproom is going to end up being a place where you can come in and try our beers, and it's going to be beer focused as opposed to hot yoga focused. And I think that's on the taproom side, but on the production side, get down to, hey, we're going to be reliable for producing the beers you love. Maybe not everything, but a really super core of beers you love, and it'll always be available. And try to make sure that when we're going to the market like Chicago, which is a huge beer market and a lot of opportunity, but balancing variety versus consistency. And I think that's really our biggest challenge from a production side and from a sales and distribution side.
Well, I can't wait to talk to you in 5 years and see how this is all working out, because the beers now are fantastic, and it's great to get out here and see what you all have built, and now both of these locations out here in Geneva. And that is a great place to bring this to a close. G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. BSG and HVG bring you the very best in German hops, including Amira, the latest from their hop breeding program. Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends in your next craft beverage. Omega's stylized yeasts bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. ProBrew has rotary can fillers in stock with a 2 to 4 week lead time. Z-Biotics is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. If you're a pro brewer, request your free samples today from the perfect puree, and $3 per pound ordered of the YCH Pink Boots blend will be donated directly to the Pink Boots Society. If you've enjoyed this episode and all the rest that we've put out there for you, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. And if you're a subscriber, of course, you can go dig up in our archives, whether that's on the website or whether that is in the app, where we have the entire all the back issues of Craft Beer and Brewing back to the very beginning, all accessible to subscribers. However you want to do it, you can access the recipe to Veritats, the Czech dark lager that we were talking about today, a recipe that Greg has written up for a homebrew scale for you brewers out there. Tom, Greg, if people want to learn more about art history, whether it's in real life, whether it's out there on the internet, whether it's finding it at a local retailer, how do they find you all?
Well, arthistorybrewing.com is a website. We're also on social media with Art History Brewing, Twitter, Art History Brew 1, and basically reach out and give us a shout out on social media, and we'd be more than happy to engage and tell you a little bit about what's going on and what we're doing.
Appreciate you both talking to us about how you brew lager. Cheers.
No problem. Thank you.
Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.